Hello. Today I'm going to be talking about the differences between the Super Nintendo Jr. and the original Super Nintendo. This is a bit of a different video today, but yeah. And I know I haven't made a lot of videos for a while, but I've got a few videos that I'm planning to release sometime. But anyway, the Super Nintendo, I believe, was released in America in 1991, and the Super Nintendo Jr., which is a redesigned version of the original, was released in 1995, and there are quite a few differences. The main one being that this one is significantly smaller. Functionality-wise, it's pretty much the same, except for a few very small differences, which I'll talk about later. But first, let's talk about the physical things, the things you can see on the outside. So first of all, the original Super Nintendo is much bigger. It has a power light, which the Super Nintendo Jr. does not. Also, it has a reset switch, whereas the Super Nintendo Jr. has a reset button. And this one has a cartridge eject button. So if I were to put a cartridge in it, I could eject the cartridge like that. But the Super Nintendo Jr. does not have that, so you gotta pull it out. Also, the Super Nintendo Jr. has a much more round and smooth design, whereas the original Super Nintendo looks a bit more blocky, kind of. You can also see that the Super Nintendo logo on this one is textured, whereas on the original it's printed. Functionality-wise, they're exactly the same, except for the fact that the original Super Nintendo is RF compatible and has a channel switcher, whereas the Super Nintendo Jr. is not, and instead only has composite. Also, the original Super Nintendo has an external connections port, but I don't think this was ever used. I don't think there were any accessories that ever used this in America. In Japan, there's something called the Satellaview, where it was basically just a satellite broadcast that you could, watch or view on your Super Famicom, but that did not exist in America. But now it's time to take a look and compare the motherboards. So I got my game bit screwdriver, the Nintendo proprietary security bit. I've taken out all the screws in the original Super Nintendo, and now it's time to take out the screws in the Super Nintendo Jr. This one only has 4 screws, whereas the original has 6 screws that you have to remove. Now, all the screws are out of the Super Nintendo Jr., so we can remove the tops of the consoles. We can see what they look like on the inside. So, here's the motherboard of the Super Nintendo. It's under this eject mechanism and also this metal RF shielding. It's significantly bigger than this motherboard, which is about the size of my hand. This one also has an external power switch that hooks up to the motherboard right here, whereas this one is surface mounted. You can see that right there. You can see the reset buttons in a bit more detail. when you press this one down, there's a thing that reaches down and presses the reset button on the motherboard. Whereas this one is a bit more complicated. When you slide it up, there is a spring and some sort of thing inside of that. I'm not sure what exactly it is, but it makes this bit go down and press the button right here. Another difference is that the buttons on this one are on the same side, whereas the buttons on this one are on opposite sides. When I remove the ejecting mechanism, you can see that underneath it, if I can get this thing off, it's difficult to remove. I got it off. Here's the mechanism. There's a spring and some stuff. But you can see that underneath it, there's a ribbon cable which leads to the controller board. Now, the controller board is an external board, unlike on the Super Nintendo Jr., where it's actually part of the motherboard, which is also another thing that's quite interesting. Here's the chipset for the SNES Jr. You can pause and take a look at that. And now I'm going to remove the shielding on the original. First, we have to remove the power switch. Now that we have both shields removed, you can see this one. And now we can see them side by side. As you can see here, the gameplay is exactly the same. But anyway, thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time.